and Mr. Adrian Plass.
How many Anglicans do we have here, just as a matter of interest? Nothing to be proud about, I can assure you. I'm an Anglican. Right, here we are then. Those Anglicans who are here will think these are just ordinary notices, of course. Good morning. A few brief notices before our service commences. In the forthcoming week, Tuesday will be the fourth Tuesday in a month that has 5 Tuesdays. So, as is our normal practice, we shall be bringing the Wednesday meeting back to Monday and holding the Tuesday meeting on Friday. I've been asked to remind everybody that the key to the side chapel is on a hook in the junction box just outside the vestry door. The key to the junction box is kept in the tall cupboard at the back of the church. The key to the tall cupboard can be found in the robing chest, which is situated just outside the vestry door, immediately under the junction box. The key to the robing chest is held by Mr. Dumphney, who has kindly agreed to make it available for collection on the first and third Mondays and the second and fourth Tuesdays of each month. On those months which actually commence on a Monday, the key will be available on the first Wednesday, the second Friday, the third Thursday, and the fourth Wednesday of that month. The side chapel has been rather underused of late. And we do hope more folk will take advantage of this facility. May I ask, friends, that when the time comes for communion, that those occupying the left-hand side of the rearmost block of pews should make their way up the north aisle, through the door into the passage between the church and the hall, turn right, just past the disabled toilet, proceed round behind the altar, and approach the rail through the north door of the Lady Chapel. It really is impossible, incidentally, to overemphasize the need to remember that right turn. Last week, Mrs. Cardew-Fitt, who is elderly and just a little confused, walked straight on out of the east door, along the high street, and eventually lined up for communion in the public bar of the Blue Cockatoo. Quite incredibly distressing consequences. Happy to announce that new arrangements for after-church coffee are working extremely well. Each Sunday we are adding to the number of folk who want coffee and actually manage to get some. Finally, friends, I'm told that some of our folk have expressed concern regarding the complicated nature of our arrangements here at St. Yorick's. Well, you know, friends, if you don't come and tell me, your vicar, what's troubling you, how on earth am I ever going to know? Eh? Come and talk it over. I am, as always, regularly available on the 5th, 7th, and 12th odd-numbered days in each month. Whatever the problem, I'm sure we can work it out in time. Thank you. think after that we ought to have a serious reading of Scripture to bring us back to earth. At last he cometh to his senses, and saith, All my father's hired workers have more than they can eat, and here am I about to starve. I will arise and go to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against thee. I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. So he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a long way off, his father seeth him, and runneth to him, and falleth on his neck, and putteth his hair, and smacketh his backside, and clumpeth him on the ear, and saith, Where the devil you been, scumbag? And the prodigal replieth, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against thee. I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thine hired servants. The father saith, Too right, I'll make thee as one of my hired servants. Master dirty, stop out inheritance spending, stinker, pinker, prodigal. I suppose thou believest thou can waltz back in here without so much as and by thine leave, and conneth me with thine dramatic little speech. Thinkest thou this is little house on the prairie? Or mayhap thou reckoneth I was born yestereen? Oh no, third assistant bog cleaner unpaid for thee, mine odorous ex-relative. Then the prodigal saith dismally unto him, Oh right, yeah, fair enough. So just to get it absolutely straight, I mean, there existeth no question of lots of nice presents and instant forgiveness and enlarged celebratory meal involving the fatted calf or anything of that nature. In thy dreams, son, replieth the father, the only gift thou art likely to see is the personalised lavatory brush with which thou shalt shortly be presented. And the father taketh the prodigal by the ear which previously he hath clumpeth, and hauleth him back to the farm. And lo, the fatted calf beholdeth them approach from an long way off, and summing up the situation perfectly, throweth an big party. And the fatted calf's family and guests rejoiceth, and doeth an bit of discow dancing, and mooeth sarcastically over the fence at the prodigal as he passeth in his tribulation. And behold, as nightfall approacheth, the prodigal's elder brother heareth distant sounds, as of an bog brush being applied. And he strolleth out to the edge of the cesspit after supper, holding an large brandy. And he stretcheth luxuriously, and picketh his teeth, and lighteth an enormous cigar, and looketh down, and saith, Evening, Rambo. I see thou hast returned then. Likest thou thine rapid progress from affluent to effluent? And the prodigal looketh up and saith, Verily thou rebukest me justly with thine clever barb. When I had great wealth I shared it not with thee, but now I freely offer thee an good share of what is mine. And he flicketh at the elder brother with his brush, so that an weighty portion of something exceeding unpleasant ploppeth into his brother's brandy glass. And his brother retireth, threatening to tell on him. And the prodigal findeth his father, and saith unto him, Behold, all these years during which I was in yon far country, mine smug, pie-faced, hypocritical dipstick of an brother must have caused thee to gnash thine teeth on an daily basis. So how come he getteth all the perks, like brandy, cigars, and such like, while I remaineth up to mine elbows in other people's poo? But his father replieth, Thine brother is boring but biddable. Get on with thine work, thou less than baldric, and think thyself lucky. The father departeth, and the prodigal saith to himself, Blow this for an game of centurions. I wisheth I hadn't come home now. Behold, I'm just as hungry, twice as guilty, and 4 times as smelly. Verily, if by an miracle any time off ever presenteth itself, there existeth in my mind no doubt about how I shall seek to occupy it. Definitely, it's an day trip to the pigs for me. You'd be amazed how many Christians I meet who see themselves as the prodigal is in that rather distorted account. Now, before I go on, I ought to say 1 or 2 people said to me earlier, never heard of you. I know who you are, but I'm coming anyway. I thought I'd just give you a few little details about me, just to help that. I've got 4 children. Anyone else here got 4 children? Yes. That worn man in the 5th row back. I've got 4 children. The oldest one is 21. He's at Exeter University. He's studying the effects of alcohol in late nights on the human system. No, he's working very hard. Putting a lot of work into it. Oh, he's lovely, really. And there's Katie, who's 8. She's absolutely wonderful. And there's David, who's 15. He's quite wonderful. And there's Joe, and he's 16. I think I've really forgotten what it's like to be a teenager. I was taught a lesson recently when one of Joe's friends came into the kitchen. And he said very politely, he said, would it be all right if I used the phone, Mr. Plass? Would that be okay? And I said, yes, of course. I thought, what polite, nice boy. So he picks up the phone and he dials a number and he said, hello? Is that Mum? Mum, I want to stay out a bit longer. No, I just want to stay out a bit longer. Well, why can't I? Well, why can't I? Everyone else is. All the others are. Well, why can't I? I hate you. I really hate you. And then he slammed the phone down, turned to me and said, thanks ever so much. Extraordinary, isn't it? One of the great problems about being a public Christian is that people think you're a kind of guru when it comes to sort of family things. And I remember 2 years ago we had lunch with the perfect Christian family. And I mean perfect. They sang choruses in harmony to us. They had 3 beautiful but restrained daughters. They had an endearingly mischievous little boy who passed things. It was a disgusting display. And at the end of the meal, the mother said, she said, Adrian, I hope you don't mind me asking, but you've had a family for some years now, and we wondered whether you could tell us which model of worship you use. I said, yes, right. Yeah, worship, right, yeah, which model? Well, we try to be as flexible as we can in this area, in the sense that we have said to them, you don't have to come if you don't want to, and that's worked very well. Because they don't want to, and I don't think they're ever out. Terrible sometimes, having to live up to other people's expectations. Do you get those awful letters from families where they tell you about all the wonderful things they've done? They're really quite intimidating, aren't they? Dear friend, it hardly seems possible that a whole year has passed since our last newsletter went out. What a lot has happened since then. Each of us has seen change, beginning with the youngest, Naomi, age 5. Little Naomi has become more spiritually alive than ever during the last 12 months. All 4 of us have the stigmata now. She is also very bright, but Rebecca and I are anxious that she should not be pushed too far too quickly where schoolwork is concerned. She must certainly finish her reception year before taking Maths A-level. And there is absolutely no question of her undertaking piano recitals in Europe until she's past her 7th birthday. Naomi continues to work hard at building up the Christian union she started at her junior school, and is very encouraged by a recent experience of personally leading the Orthodox Jewish headmaster to Christ. Naomi's after-school activities include a chess class on Monday. She earns her pocket money by teaching that. applied thermonuclear dynamics on Tuesday, netball training with other members of the county team on Thursdays, and a soup run into the East End every Friday evening. Naomi is easily the most popular girl in her class and was voted Miss Young and Humble at church this year. Although she refused to accept the trophy, saying she was an unworthy winner. This act of pure unselfishness resulted in her being nominated for the award of Most Humble Church Member of All, an award which she subsequently won and accepted, feeling that it would have been subtly vain to refuse. Please pray with Rebecca and I that Naomi will learn how to put herself first from time to time. Failure to do this is her major fault. Joshua, age 16. Joshua has gained 15 A grades GCSEs and 9 spiritual gifts this year, including sociology and prophecy. The one to be most earnestly sought after, according to the Apostle Paul, prophecy that is, not sociology. Over the next 2 years, he hopes to take the word of the Lord to communist China and 12 A-levels. Joshua spent his summer holiday converting Guatemala with a group of pals, constructing a life-size working model of Apollo 3 out of drinking straws, and practicing the 5 Cantonese dialects in which he's now practically fluent. But you know, it's not all plain sailing with Joshua. A typically wayward and rebellious 16-year-old, he's several times sneaked off to his room to do a couple of hours extra academic study, when he knows he should be concentrating on tightening up his dressage skills in the back paddock ready for the Olympics. And on more than one occasion, he's actually disappeared from the house altogether, only to be discovered guiltily shopping for the elderly lady who lives 2 doors away, or sitting and reading to her for long periods after cooking and serving her evening meal. Both Oxford and Cambridge universities have applied to have Joshua join them in 2 years' time, and he will probably fly up as soon as his pilot's license comes through to look over both establishments before making a decision. Rebecca. Rebecca continues to enjoy producing homemade jam, bread, cakes, wine, preserves, crocheted bedspreads, small animal models made out of baked dough, dried flower decorations, knitted baby clothes, banners, and kneeling mats for our local church, and meals for the housebound. She has completed her first novel this year, held a successful one-woman oil painting exhibition, been awarded a 3rd Open University degree, and continues to single-handedly look after our 12-acre ornamental garden. When her duties as mother, wife, amateur apiarist, semi-professional photographer, local magistrate, prison visitor, hospital volunteer, leading light in the Amateur Dramatic Association, treasurer of the Ladies Tennis Club, district council member, and world chairperson of Women Against Poverty allow. Rebecca is currently looking for some new challenge to occupy the spare time that she, in common with many non-working mothers, finds hanging so heavily on her hands. Next year, in addition to her present activities, she plans to become a special policewoman, stand as a prospective parliamentary candidate, complete a solo sailing trip around the world, and find a method of bottling gooseberries that doesn't lose all the flavour. Please pray that Rebecca will develop a stronger sense of self-worth in the company of other women. Doesn't it make you sick? My own memories of my own family, in fact, my own experiences now with my family are much more granular, I'm afraid, than that. Recently, I remembered the rail journey we used to make from Tunbridge Wells, where we lived then, down to Eastbourne, which is fairly near where we live now. And I wanted to write something for my wife to use in the junior school where she was working. And this is what we came up with in the end. This is like it was for us. From Tunbridge Wells to Eridge, Heathfield, Horham, Hellingly, Through Hailsham, Polegate, Hampden Park, we saw the steam trains fly. Long ago, one seaside day before the clock struck 6, as morning poured out sunshine on our pavement made of bricks, we ran with picnic towels and trunks and Macs in case of rain to meet the bus that took us down to catch the Eastbourne train. How smashing, how fantastic to get off at Tunbridge Wells, to hurry to the Old West Station sniffing steam train smells, to board the sooty monster that would thunder down the line, to where the screaming seagulls dived towards the froth and shine. The journey started. Soon we stopped at tiny Eridge Station. Eridge people piled inside to share our destination. John was first to get told off. If you make nasty smells, we're getting off at Heathfield. There's a bus to Tunbridge Wells. Heathfield came, Heathfield went. John was smelly good. We didn't have to go back home. We never thought we would. Are we nearly there yet? All the children ask. Can we have a sandwich yet? I'm thirsty. Where's the flask? I hope you brought my bucket. Did you bring it? Are you sure? Mum, I'm bored. I want the toilet. Well, why can't I explore? Is this Eastbourne? No, it's Horham. Ian's got sweets. It isn't fair. Well, if you saved money, you'd have sweets. Mum, are we nearly there? 2 men got off at Hellingly. A mystery to me. What's the point of getting off before you reach the sea? In and out of Hailsham, past fields of cows and sheep, Ian was lost in comics, John was fast asleep. But as we puffed to Polegate, I could swear I smelled the sea. I heard the crash of breaking waves as clearly as could be. Oh, what joy to live in Hampden Park, with Eastbourne just next door, to walk or cycle every day in minutes to the shore. The engine hissed and panted, brakes were shrieking, squealing loud. John woke, we gathered up our things and joined the Eastbourne crowd. From Tunbridge Wells to Eridge, Heathfield, Horham, Hellingly, through Hailsham, Polegate, Hampden Park, we saw the steam trains fly. I've never been to a service where they start like this. This is from the old diary. Sunday. If I'd known George Farmer was leading the service this morning, I wouldn't have gone. He started by shouting things at the congregation in a loud 36 visions before breakfast sort of voice. George Farmer, good morning! Congregation feebly, morning! George Farmer, not satisfied, I said good morning! Congregation forcing slightly more volume through tired tonsils. Good morning! George Farmer, are we joyful? Congregation in a strangled bleat, like a herd of sick sheep. Yes! George Farmer, well, we don't sound very joyful. I'll ask you again, are we joyful? Congregation panicked into thinking that lack of volume is a sin. Yes! George Farmer, that's more like it. And are we glad to be in the house of God this morning? Congregation playing the game well now. Yes! George Farmer cupping his hand playfully round his ear. And where do we all hope to go one day? Congregation, heaven! Leonard Thin, Tenerife. Pause, all look at Thin. Thin, sorry, heaven. We get into really odd habits, don't we? I mean, it's as though each generation has to copy the last and perhaps just change a little bit of what it does. Here's something else I see all over the place. See if you recognize this. This is another way of beginning meetings.
Okay, let's just turn away from the hurly-burly and the rush and bustle and the everyday concerns and the toing and froing and the ups and downs and the worries and the problems and the responsibilities and yesterday's regrets and today's anxieties and tomorrow's fears. And let's just get into that peaceful state where we're just ready to just receive and just listen. Let's just keep silence for just a minute while we just do that. And then you have to make these smiley sipping noises. Like this, you go. And then you launch into prayer like an Exocet missile. We just want to just ask that this thing we're just going to do, I can't remember just what it is just at the moment, just that it will really be just really blessed in a way that's really just right, and we'll all be really conscious of how you just want to really help us to just do it in the right way, and that all those involved will just really come to know that you just want to just really show them how you really just want them to just realize the truth about just understanding that you're really just. Oh, I've seen some funny things. I remember in Australia, huge charismatic conference, really big. And I always get a bit worried, like here, you know, where things are happening at the front and all that, you know. And I'm just, you know, I'm a fringe person. And big charismatic conference. And just before I started, the organizer came up to me where I was sitting at the back there, trying to work out how much I would have earned if everybody had paid £4 each and I'd had 60%. And he said, I'm so sorry to interrupt your time with the Lord. I know how precious that is. So I crinkled my eyes and said, it's okay. He said, I just want to tell you, brother, we've left half an hour at the end for your ministry. I asked, what is that then? What is my ministry? So he said, well, you know, commitment to Christ, recommitment to Christ, healing of the body, that kind of thing. I said, I don't really do ministry. So he said, no worries, I'll do it for you. So when I'd finished, he comes out the front and he says, right, Adrian's done a jolly good talk. Now all those who want to make a first-time commitment to Christ, if you could line up over here. All those who want to make a recommitment to Christ, you line up down here. All those who want healing of the body, line up down here. Anyone who doesn't fit into any of those categories, perhaps you could form a line over there. So if you can imagine these 3,000 charismatics milling blankly around, saying things like, well, I want to make a recommitment, but I need healing of the body as well. I don't know whether to go in that line or that line. And up in heaven, God is saying, oh, my God. I think God must really laugh at us. There's a wonderful bit in Job, I don't know if you've read it, where Job is reminiscing about the old pre-boil days. And he's sitting there covered in boils, praising God. What a man. And he remembers when he used to speak to people. And he says... three things. He says, my words fell gently on their ears, he says. It was like the spring rain. And the bit I really like, he says, I smiled at them and they were amazed. People are amazed when God smiles at them. And they suddenly know he is. It happened to me at Spring Harvest this year, actually. I've not often had a shock at Spring Harvest. You ever had a shock at Spring Harvest? Yes. I always end up in the seminar where God isn't, don't you? Terrible. I always end up in the black marker pen and flowchart seminar. And afterwards people say, oh, you should have been in this, so it was fantastic. The Spirit really moved. Oh, black marker pen and flowchart. Clive Calver exploded on stage. Anyway, the Spring Harvest this year, right? This is true. I was there with Phil and John doing some appearances there. And I came up against this man who I've met several times. He's a kind of elder of the whole church in this country. I'm funny about it. And much respected. And whenever he sees me, I don't see him very often, but whenever I do see him, he always has something to say about my life. He sees things in my life. Sort of person you avoid like the plague. And there he was, and I always get a bit hysterical when I see him. He'll say, praise the Lord! Hallelujah! Isn't it wonderful to be a Christian? My Christian walk's going really well. How's yours going? Mine's going really well. I'm having a great time with the Lord. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. It's terrible, feverish, defensive joy. And I eventually ran out of steam. And he said, I know exactly what God thinks about you. That's awful, isn't it? You know, all your life you want to know, don't you? You really want to know. Even though you say in church, the Lord loves me, I love the inside, I want to know. Does he like me? Does he like me? Does he hate me? Does he think I'm bad? Has he really forgiven me? Am I one of the ones who's not been chosen? And he was going to tell me. I was so scared. I tell you, I was really scared. And I thought, I'm going to have to hear this. So I said, all right, what does he think about me? And he said, he loves you without condition. He loves you without any condition at all. He loves you whether you work for him or whether you don't, which is important for me. He loves you whether you're good or whether you're bad. He loves you without condition. I know some of you will want to fire scripture from the hip when you hear that. But what he's really saying, you see, is like the old prodigal, the real story. God loved him even while he was sleeping with prostitutes. He loved him. The Father loved him, wanted him back. And it really moved into my heart what he said. Wonderful, wonderful. Amazed to find God smiling at me, because I find it so difficult to believe, because I'm made like that. What else has happened on our travels? Well, I remember something in New Zealand. Anyone here been to New Zealand? Anyone here from New Zealand? Woo! You pathetic little whoop from down there. No, it wasn't. It was only one whoop. It's difficult when you're the only whooper. You are the sole whooper. We were in this house, right? Now imagine this. We've got one evening left to do, Bridget and I, and we were feeling pretty good. We'd done pretty good down there. And we thought we've got one more to do. We're going to storm on stage. We're really going to do it. That night, we went to sleep in this kind of dormitory thing at the top of this cottage on a mountain. And to get to the toilet, sorry to mention the toilet, but it's essential to the story. Well, it's essential, but it's essential to the story. To get to the toilet, you had to go out of these doors, unbolt the doors, down some wooden steps, unlock the bottom of the house, go into the house, use the toilet, come out, lock the door, come up the steps, under the door, come in, bolt the door, go back to bed. And there was a metal bucket up there, but I like to use a metal bucket, too. A bit noisy. And so we all went to the toilet before we went to bed. And in the early hours, I woke up to hear a voice in the distance saying, Adrian, Adrian, help, help. So I asked God for his protection and turned to wake Bridget up. And she wasn't there. She'd gone, right? Now, what had happened, I learned later, was that she'd gone out, she'd unbolted the door. She, too, couldn't face the metal bucket. The thought of waking someone up or peeing in a metal bucket is just too much. She'd gone out of the door, and she'd gone down the wooden steps. She'd forgotten to put the light off before she went out. And she also forgot that the steps turned left. And she just went over the edge. 6 foot down, and landed on the ground. And she was calling me out. I rushed out of the door, also forgetting to turn the light on. But I didn't walk down the steps. I sprinted down the steps, forgetting that they turned left. And I didn't fall, I took off. It was like, must have been like Eddie Edwards suddenly appearing above her head. And whee, like that. And landed beyond her. So these two people crawling around in the dark, going, ah, ah. Awful. And the next evening, we had to crawl up on stage, covered in plasters and bandages, to talk about our victorious walk with the Lord. God always gets us, doesn't he? I just thought I'd talk for a little while about the need for us to be like children. I'm always on about that. Like I said, I've got 4 children, and I've learned an immense amount from my kids, and perhaps particularly from young Katie, some wonderful memories. I remember, for instance, Katie, one spring morning when she was very little, standing on the lawn, holding a bluebell as high as she could, right up like that, and shouting, "Daffodil, daffodil." And you know how pedantic we parents are. Can't leave the poor kid alone to enjoy the morning. I said, "Darling, actually, they're just not a daffodil. That's a bluebell." And she didn't lower her arm a millimeter or her voice a decibel. And she said, "Bluebell, bluebell." And I thought how wonderful it would be if we Christians accepted correction like that. So that when we say something silly like, "You have to speak in tongues to be a Christian," and God says, "No, you don't," we'd say, "You don't have to speak in tongues to be a Christian." Because our priority would be this wonderful morning, being with Jesus. It would be more important than being right. We do seem to major on being right. It's very hard sometimes, to be obedient, to change. I have a friend called Jeff Lucas. Anyone come across Jeff Lucas? He's a Pentecostal evangelist. Yes, he's very, very well known. Well, he said he was. He's a great bloke, but when it came to his own father, isn't this so often the case? Couldn't touch him. Couldn't make any impact on him. And it got a bit galling after a while, He thought, wow, all these people, they come to faith through me, but I can't even touch my old dad. Maybe it's something wrong with me. And he's sitting at home one day and he's thinking, why can't I make any impact on my father? And a little voice suddenly seemed to say to him, "When did you last tell your dad you love him? When did you last say I love you to your dad?" And he thought, well, I never did. I should have done, but I haven't. So with great courage, because if you don't normally say I love you to your family, it's easier to convert Greenland than to get those words out of your mouth. You have to drag them out of your boots, don't you, and force them out. But very bravely, old Jeff goes round to see his dad and sat next to him and put his arm round him, and the old chap flinched, thinking another evangelical blast was on its way. And Jeff said, "Dad, I should have said this a long time ago, but I do love you, And his dad made a commitment within a fortnight. Because the gospel of Jesus Why do people always do that with their legs when they're going to say something serious? It's funny, isn't it? Because the gospel... I'll stop that straight away. They go like this, don't they? So they're sort of getting ready to... Oh, I can't do anything now. I feel all funny now. The gospel of Jesus is not John 3:16, thrown like some spiritual hand grenade into the middle of a situation and then a kind of magical moment. It's Jesus knowing what's needed and us trying to hear and to obey. It's very difficult. You know, my wife pointed something out to me, and it's absolutely true. She was talking about the woman at the well, you know, when Jesus came to the well and the disciples went off to get the shopping. Often wondered why they all went, haven't you? I think he'd had enough for a while. I reckon one or two of them said, well, we'll go and do the shopping. He said, I think you should all go. There's quite a lot of food there. So they've gone off to whatever the Samaritan equivalent of Tesco's is, and he's sitting there by the well, and he has this amazing conversation with the woman, doesn't he? And then the disciples come back carrying their bags from Tesco's, and he says, I don't need food anymore. And they, typical disciples, say, oh, this must be a shop just around the corner. We didn't know. Needn't have gone all that way. And he says, and this is the bit that she pointed out, I've never really focused on before. He says, my food is to do the will of my Father. That's what fed him. That's what fed him. That's what made him strong. I thought of that today, actually, when we left Hailsham. My wife's doing a sort of children's holiday club thing. And they get about 100 kids a day, very difficult ones. And they were just having their little meeting after the kids had gone. I looked at this little semicircle of people, and you know, they weren't the very spiritual ones. They weren't the ones who are right up the front in the spiritual race in our town. There's some funny old people there. God had told them to go and help, so they did. I'm sorry to get philosophical, but I wish we could understand that Jesus is the great shoelace tire. He's the one at the back who looks after the fat ones and the ones with the bad foot and the ones who don't think they can walk anymore. He's not the one who marches up the front to get there before anybody else. If you want to be obedient, you're going to find yourself in some very humble situations, I think, sometimes. Another thing I learned from Kate, and I find his story so moving still, was when we were in France and we cycled over as a family, nearest thing to hell I have ever experienced. It was awful. I had Katie in a bucket seat on the back of my bike. And we're cycling up French hills with her saying, are we there yet? I could have killed her. I really began to feel a profound sympathy with Moses in the wilderness. Are we there? No, we are not there yet. How long is it going to take? 40 years. 40 years? 40 years? I'll be dead by then. I hope so. No, I don't. No. Anyway, after trailing around France with this lump in my bucket seat, I love my lump, but in the bucket seat, what a lump. We get to this church in Dieppe, and we're walking around at museum pace, you know, like you do. And I found Katie standing quite motionless, looking at a statue of Mary, Jesus' mother, holding the body of her dead son. And she was standing absolutely still. And as I came up, she turned her head round and she said, "Daddy, why has he got a hole in his side?" And I thought, oh, blimey. So I'd never explained the crucifixion. It's so horrible. So I said, well, they killed Jesus in the end, Kate, and they made a hole in his side with a spear, and that's what that hole is. Killed him, said Kate, because she likes Jesus. Why kill him? I said, well, I'm sorry, but they did, and that's what that hole is. And she turned and looked at it again, and she said, Daddy, he's got holes in his feet. Why has he got holes in his feet? I thought, oh, blimey. I said, well, and there was a crucifix just up on the wall above us. And I said, you see that? That's called the cross. And they nailed Jesus to it, and the holes in his feet are where they nailed his feet. Nailed his feet? Said Kate. What a horrible thing to do. But of course, small children are fascinated by bizarre things, aren't they? And she turned and looked at it again, and I knew what she'd say, and she did. She said, Daddy, he's got holes in his hands. They didn't nail his hands, did they? And everything in me wanted to say, no, of course they didn't. Who'd do a thing like that? But I said, and I felt I was apologizing for the whole of mankind. I said, they did, Kate. They nailed him up on the cross, his hands and his feet, and they stuck a spear in his side, and that's how he died. And dear old Kate, without any of the self-consciousness that we sadly develop as we get older, walked over to the statue, and she laid her face down on his knee, and she put her arm around him and said, poor Jesus. Wonderful, isn't it? Wonderful. Made me want to go back to the time when I first understood that Jesus died for me. And it really hurt him. Dear Kate, what a lesson. I also remember saying to my son Matthew when he was little, I asked him if he thought I got any little faults or problems as a Christian. Yes, quite. And I thought he'd say, well, you're my model really, Dad. I look at you and I think, that's how I want to be. So he said, well, how long have you got? So I said, very amusing, Matthew. You can tell me one thing. And he said, all right then, he said, let's be honest, Sunday mornings are chaos. World War III. Everyone's rushing around, throwing socks at each other and shouting at each other. At last we get out and we start walking to church. I take the dog back. We get into church and suddenly it's hallelujah, praise the Lord and all this stuff. And then we go home and it's World War IV. He said, how come there's this difference between the way we are at home and the way we are at church? Yes, all right, Matthew, I said, you may go. But obviously it made me think, and I wrote this rather silly little verse. This is a child talking about Sunday. Sunday is a funny day. It starts with lots of noise. Mummy rushes round with socks and Daddy shouts, you boys! Then Mummy says, now don't blame them. You know you're just as bad. You've only just got out of bed. You really make me mad. My mummy is a Christian. My daddy is as well. My mummy says, oh heavens. My daddy does as well. Yeah, but when we get to church at last, it's really very strange, because Mum and Dad stop arguing and suddenly they change. At church, my Mum and Dad are friends. They get on very well. But no one knows they've had a row, and I'm not going to tell. People often come to them because they seem so nice. And Mum and Dad are very pleased to offer them advice. They tell them Christian freedom is worth an awful lot. But I don't know what freedom means, if freedom's what they've got. Daddy loves the meetings. He's always at them all. He's learning how to understand the letters of St. Paul. But Mummy says I'm stuck at home to lead my Christian life. Just as well for blinking Paul, he didn't have a wife. I once heard my mummy say she'd walk out of his life. I once heard Daddy say to her he'd picked a rotten wife. I think they love each other. I really think they do. I think the people in the church would help them if they knew. When we don't have childlikeness in the church, it becomes very dry, doesn't it? One of the stories I haven't told for years, but I will bore you with now. Some years ago, when we lived in Bromley, I went into a supermarket looking for sugar. Now, I don't know if you know this, but they hide sugar in supermarkets. It's a ploy on part of the management to make people hunt for it, because it's an essential, you see. So I come in through the front, and there's an enormous sign over the tills saying, Safeways welcomes cooperative customers. Which I suppose they would when you think about it, but I don't think they actually meant that. Perhaps they did. Because they went on to say, we will be warmly grateful to customers who report breakages in the aisles. So I registered this, went off, found my sugar at last in the gardening department or wherever it was. And on the way back, I found an absolute beauty of a breakage or spillage. It was wonderful. It was one of those bell jar-sized glass containers of piccalilli sauce. And it had landed like a bomb on the floor of the aisle. A wonderful yellow gelatinous mess with bits of glass sticking out of it. And I thought, this is great. This is where I come in for a bit of warm gratitude from Safeways. So I made my way to the 12 items or less queue. And that's where you learn just how narrow and judgmental you really are, isn't it? Found myself standing behind this woman, looking in her basket and going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She's got 13 things in her basket. You can forgive someone who beats you up, but the lady who has 13 items in the 12 items, oh no. Anyway, I eventually got to the front of the queue, and I paid for my sugar. And then I said to the girl, who was about 9, I said, and I'd rehearsed this coming up the queue. You know how when you're not used to saying things, you practice in your head, don't you? I said, oh, by the way, there's a breakage in the pickle aisle. I thought it sounded pretty cool. And I stood back waiting for this wave of warm gratitude to sweep over me. And she didn't say anything. She pressed a button next to her, and this chap came up, dressed in a green dicky bow and a green trilby. He was a lot older than her. He was about 15. And he said, what? And she said, and every word came out like a lump of dough and landed on the counter in front of her. She said, customer complaining about a breakage in the pickle aisle. And this chap stomped off. And you know how polite we Christians are normally. I mean, we're horribly polite, aren't we? I'm just as bad. When my car goes in for repair yet again and comes back unrepaired, I say to my wife, right, that's it, I'm going up there. This time they've had it. I'm going to the guy, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind like they've never heard it before. And I go up there and I say, hello. Any chance of me spending some more money on my car? I don't know how Christians ever got the idea. I mean, imagine if Jesus had said to the Pharisees, may I just say, in love, that I do think you are just a little bit viperish. I mean, we all are, but I think you've got a special problem in this area. Or when it came to turning the temple over, if he'd said, sorry, do you mind? Sorry, could I? But I so wanted my warm gratitude on this occasion that I actually called this, but I said, oi, mate. I said, I'm not complaining, I'm cooperating. And I'd like some warm gratitude, please. And he said, well, you don't have to clear it up, do you? And he walked off, and you could hear his voice. He shouted out, breakage in the pickle oil. And you could hear all these voices receding into the bowels of the shop. Breakage in the pickle oil, breakage in the pickle oil. And eventually a form of lowlife came out with probably a university student on vacation, with a bucket and a trowel or something, and started clearing it up. But the point was that nobody in that shop was willing to represent that huge sign over the tills. I guess if the managing director had been there, he might have come up and said, I'd like to formally thank you on behalf of Safeways for this wonderful piece of reporting, and we are indeed corporately, warmly grateful. But he wasn't there, and no one could have given a tinker's uncle, to use a theological expression. What is missing so often in the church when people come in is the freshness, the smile, the openness of childlikeness, the thing that will attract them, the thing that makes me keep on looking at my daughter, just looking at her. Someone was telling me earlier back there that, I can't remember the figures, children smile some amazing number of times each day, and adults about 14. Something goes very wrong, doesn't it, in the gap between childhood and adulthood. Somebody said to me when I was coming in, are you going to do the sex thing? Well, those of you who don't know what I'm talking about will be deeply alarmed, I'm quite sure. But, so I will do the sex thing. A bit worried with Anglicans here. We Anglicans can hardly manage the peace, let alone sex. I mean, that's about as passionate as we get, isn't it? Awful with peace, isn't it? In our church, I've got a friend, she says, when the peace comes, my hands get all clammy. I get all rigid, and I look to my right and I think, well, I'm not kissing him. Terrible tension. Anyway, this thing arose because some years ago I had a phone call from Greenbelt, which is a kind of swamp with tents floating on top of it. And, oh, you've been there. And they said, will you do a seminar on sex, you see? So I was quite flattered. I thought, hey, yes. Yeah, become a bit of a guru. Get a couple of paperbacks out of this. I thought I'd be a Greenbelt speaker on sex. Yeah. And I sort of mentally posed for some time. And then I suddenly thought, hold on a minute, what am I going to say? Because they'd heard it all before with teenagers, you know, sex is a jolly good thing within the context of marriage. God likes sex, beautiful thing, sex. As long as you're married, it's all right. That's not like beautiful. What am I going to say that's any different? And I got so worried. In the end, I said to my wife, look, it's all going to get so negative. I said, I'm going to end up standing up there and saying, right, don't have sex. It's bad and wrong unless you're married. If you're married, it's all right. But if you're not married, don't have it. Stop it. Okay, pathetic, negative message as usual from a jolly old church. I said to Bridget, look, I'm going to have to phone in sick. So I can't think of anything to say that's of any use. And she said, look, don't give up, don't give up. Let me think about it. I'll go away, I'll think about it, and I'll come back and tell you what I've thought. She's very good at having ideas, my wife. It was our 25th wedding anniversary last week. That's silver, isn't it? Yes. The one before was polystyrene, I think. Anyway, she went away and she came back and she said, I've got it. She said, what is it that has caused more conflict in our marriage than anything else? Tricky question. Because if you get it wrong, You've got another one on the list, haven't you? 25 years, you learn a few things, I'll tell you. So I tentatively went through a list of 5 or 6 things, and it wasn't any of them. And she said, no, come on. What is it that... Doing it again. What is it... I'll stop doing that. What is it that brings us nearer to actually hitting each other, actually physical blows, than anything else? Then, of course, I realized how silly, of course. Map reading. Map reading. All these Christian paperbacks on, you know, pencil sharpening in the spirit and all the rest of it. Nothing on map reading, which causes more real conflict than almost anything else. It's awful. I mean, we know a couple who are missionaries, and they're wonderful. They talk like that. And they're lovely people. And they talk about what the Lord is doing, where they are. And He is. But when they get into a car, they change. It's awful. Suddenly, away they go. Why didn't you tell me that turning was coming up on the left? Well, you told me you didn't want every little wrinkle on the map. That's not a wrinkle, that's the M4, you stupid woman. Don't call me a stupid woman. Well, don't be stupid then. Make me cry now. Good. And these are the nice people. I mean, what happens in the cars are the nasty people. Beyond belief. Anyway, she said, really, elders and vicars and people like that ought to talk to their young engaged couples about map reading. And the sex would just follow on naturally from there. So she said, what you want to do is to write a sketch that combines sex and map reading. So I said, oh yeah, right. You go and pop the dinner on and I'll write a sketch that combines sex and map reading. But she was right. She's always right. And... No, she's wonderful. She's wonderful. She really is. This was a sketch we used at the beginning of the seminar. It's a vicar or something like that, talking to a young engaged couple called Sally and Slim. And don't forget, it's sex and map reading. Well now, Sally and Slim, this is the last of our marriage preparation sessions, and we've already covered an awful lot of ground. Last week, Slim shared with us that he couldn't actually recall asking you to marry him, Sally. And that he was profoundly horrified by the prospect of spending the rest of his life with you, to the extent that, and I think he put this very picturesquely, he would rather be stung slowly to death by killer bees than face you over the breakfast table every morning for the next 50 years. And I think we sorted that one out okay last Thursday. It's one of those little worries that needs to be aired, and well done you for airing it. Now it's your turn this week, Sally, to throw up any little last-minute worries or problems. Yeah, well, there was one thing, and, well, it ruined my parents' marriage, so I did wonder if we could talk about it. Well, of course we can, Sally, but what is it? Is it alcoholism? No. Is it finance? No. Is it exegetical incongruity? No. No, we sorted that out with a pair of curling tongs. Did you? Ah, so you must be talking about, navigation. Well, yes, indeed, and I can tell you, Sally and Slim, that many, many marriages founder on the rock of navigational ignorance and conflict. Something that should be a natural, joyful, spontaneous experience can so easily end in trouble and tears. Yeah, well, we was wondering about positions. Yeah, okay. Oh, well, traditionally, the man, that would be you in this case, Slim. Can I just make a note of that? Traditionally, the man would sit in he'd be in the driving seat, and the woman, that's the lady, she'd sit in the passenger seat, and she'd probably just have the map just spread out. So on her knees. Times have changed, of course, and nowadays many couples prefer to do it the other way around. Absolutely nothing wrong with that as long as both partners are happy and relaxed about what's going on. That's all that really matters. Oh. Well, the thing is, we're going to Leeds for our honeymoon in the car. So do you think we ought to navigate our way up there before we get married, just to see if we can manage it all right or not? Look, I'm going to say the same thing to you as I say to all young engaged couples. It's perfectly proper to make short trips and excursions in the general direction of Leeds. But I must counsel you against going all the way at this stage. I think Milton Keynes is quite far enough. And let's be absolutely frank, once you get as far as Nottingham, it's very hard to stop. I mean, times have changed. Of course they have. Since I was a young man, when I was first driving out with a young lady, it would never have occurred to me to leave Littlehampton. Let alone attempt to navigate all the way to Leeds. Not that I wasn't interested, I hasten to add. I well remember getting a terrible roasting from my dear father when he, well, I might as well be honest, he found a street map of Huddersfield under my mattress. Now, any other little questions or problems? Yeah, well, we did want to ask if it's possible, I mean, when we do actually start navigating to Leeds when we're married, I mean, if we get stuck at a junction and Slim says it's my fault for reading the map wrong, and I say it's Slim's fault because he wasn't sensitive to the road signs, and Slim says he wishes he'd never married me in the first place, and I hit Slim with the emergency flash lamp we've asked Uncle Vernon and Auntie Grace to buy us for a wedding present, and we crash because Slim temporarily loses consciousness, and we're on the verge of giving up navigation altogether. Yes. Well, can you help us then? No. But I know a man who can. And he drives a patrol car in the sky. Well, thank you, Vicky. You're a very nice man. You're a very, very nice man. I know it's all very well to talk about being like a child. Some of us, and I'm one of them, find it very difficult indeed to face up to the children that we were. Let the kid in you hear this. Poor sad child. Poor child. Poor boy. Poor girl. Don't run. Don't run away. Don't hide. We love you. We're so sorry we let you down. We left you. We settled for too little. You see, we were frightened of your pain. Pain is better buried, we thought. But we were wrong. So wrong to leave you there. to leave you wondering if tears can ever really dry. We threw our lot in with the half alive. But now we've come to find you. We can face you now. We so long to see your face. We want to see you smile. Dear child, be our child again. We've brought a friend who changes things. He's with us now. His name is Jesus. Jesus. He can heal you. He can make you smile again. You love him. We love him. He loves you so much. So much. Poor, sad child. I love to think of God smiling at us, don't you? I think he laughs at us a bit as well, but he does smile at us. I'm going to finish in a minute. I just want to read you two things I'm determined to read. One is, sometimes before I come to meetings, people pray an encouraging prayer. And sometimes they frighten me to death. Here's a sort of exaggerated form of one of them. Lord, we just want to ask that when Adrian, frail, weak, inadequate, incompetent, and totally lacking in strength and talent as the world judges such things, stands up before those rows and rows of intimidating, judgmental, critical faces, his stomach turning to water, feeling his trembling legs will never support him for long enough to deliver his unworthy message, that when he stands up there, Lord, he'll forget the ever-present possibility that his listeners will heckle, throw fruit, shout derisively, and eventually jeer him off the stage, and possibly pursue him with a view to committing physical violence on his person. Let him feel encouraged, Lord, by the knowledge that even though he may experience the lurching nausea of fear, the misery of abject humiliation, and the searing pain of a steel toe cap in the side of the head, it matters not. Yea, though he be systematically battered to death with half bricks and lengths of lead piping, let him rejoice and be glad. Amen. And the next to last thing to say to us children of God is about healing. Everywhere I go, I meet people who've been healed and people who haven't been healed. So I'm forced to the conclusion that God both heals and doesn't heal. Well, it's what happens, isn't it? God is in charge. He does what he likes. The thing that the people who haven't been healed can't stand is the excuses people make for not being healed. God is in charge. It is as though Scripture has been rewritten. Have a listen to this. A man with leprosy cometh and kneeleth before him and saith, Lord, if thou art willing, thou canst make me clean. Jesus reacheth out his hand and toucheth the man. I am willing, he saith, be clean. And behold, Jesus strolleth away rejoicing. But the leper haileth him with a loud voice, saying, excuse me, my habit hath escaped thy notice, but I am still an leper. And small point, but important to me. And Jesus hisseth through his teeth, and replieth, Knowest thou not that I am heavily into holistic healing? Good heavens, thou must be indeed well naive if thou thinkest the healing concerneth thy body only. Keepest thou not up with current literature on the subject? The man saith, All I knoweth is that I was an leper 5 minutes ago, and behold, I am still an leper. Well, asserteth Jesus, despite thine complaints, thou art in a very real sense no longer an leper. Oh, terrific, saith the man. But I am still an leper in the trivial but equally real sense that bits of me are droppeth off. And thou seemest incapable of replacing them. Then Jesus snorteth and demandeth, why doth there always have to be one? All right, mate, there existeth a number of possibilities, none of which I mighteth add constituteth a failure on the part of myself or any other member of the management team. Counteth them off on thy fingers. It'll have to come to less than 3 then, saith the leper. Jesus ignoreth him. 1, thou lackest faith, highly likely. 2, thou hast failed to claim thine healing, common one that. 3, thou hast been specially chosen to benefit others through thine suffering, congratulations. 4, thine healing is to be in the form of death, bye. 5, thou art called but not chosen, tough. Anyway, I must departeth, I am up for a big catering contract and the size of the budget challengeth me greatly. He goeth and the leper gathereth himself together. And repeateth over and over to himself, I am not an leper, I am not an leper, I am not an leper. And behold, from that day forth he became known as the mad leper. And last of all, I don't know what you think about heaven, but most of us are a bit worried about it. Is it going to be like one of our Sunday morning services, only going on forever? I think it'll be quite nice, really. I do. The God who invented sex, my daughter's eyes, claret. I mean, we've all got different lists, haven't we? Cricket, not cricket. Wonderful. He thought of them. He thought of them. What a rich experience to be with him. One of our great tasks, and when I was reading that poem just now about, talking to the child in us, some of us will have been aware then how difficult we find it to play because the kid in us was never quite allowed to. When we get to heaven, we're going to play. I'll finish with this. Oh God, I'm not anxious to snuff it. But when the grim reaper reaps me, I'll try to rely on my vision of Zion. I know how I want it to be. As soon as you greet me in heaven and ask what I'd like, I shall say, I just want a chance for my spirit to dance. I want to be able to play. Will you tell the angels to build a soft playground designed and equipped just for me with a vertical slide that's abnormally wide and oceans of green PVC. There'll be reinforced netting to climb on and rubberized floors that will bend, and no one can die, so I needn't be shy if I'm tempted to land on a friend. I'm going to go mad in the soft, squashy mangle and balmy with balls in the swamp. Coloured and spherical, I'll be hysterical. I'll have a heavenly romp. I expect there'll be cushions, punch bags and tires in purple and yellow and red, and one of them mushroomy things that will suddenly sing when I kick it or sit on its head. There'll be fountains of squash and Ribena to feed my continual thirst, and none of that stuff about you've had enough. Surely heavenly bladders won't burst. Look, I know I'm too tall for the entrance, but Lord, chuck the rules in the bin. If I am too large, tell the angel in charge to let me bow down and come in. Good night. Thank you.